Chapter 38, The Role of Existing Churches in an African Movement, by Shalom. Existing local churches play a vital role in disciple-making movement. From the beginning of our ministry, we underline this principle. Whatever ministry we do, we make sure the church will be actively involved in kingdom ministry. Sometimes people think if a church isn't traditional, it won't be accepted by existing churches, but I believe the vital key is relationship. We approach church leaders at whatever level they are and share the bigger vision, the Great Commission. That's more than the local church, more than their neighborhood, and more than their immediate context. If we share with love, relationship, and sincere motive of kingdom expression, we have found that churches will listen. In one area, we currently have formal partnerships with 108 totally indigenous groups. Some are local churches and some are indigenous ministries. From the beginning, we approach them through informal conversation. We talk about the tasks God has given in the Great Commission, and that takes us toward formal discussion with whoever is responsible in the church. If they're open, we set up a training for initial exposure that may be 2 to 5 days. We strongly encourage them to make sure the right people are invited. We want to have 20% of attendees become people in leadership and about 80% be practitioners. That proportion is very important. If we only train leaders, they are so busy that even though they have a good heart, they usually don't have time to really implement what they're learning. If we only train field leaders or church planters, it will be very difficult to implement because the church leaders will not understand what needs to happen. So we make sure that we have the decision makers and implementers being trained together. We focus first on hard issues. We talk about the Great Commission, the unfinished task, and the challenge. Then we talk about the opportunities and how we can fulfill the Great Commission. That's where the disciple-making movement strategy comes in. The final question is, what are we going to do to get there together? Whenever we do a training, we commit to following it up and really involve the decision makers in the development. One training event with a church is not the end. We want to walk with them on a journey. Our motto is ignite, accelerate, and sustain disciple-making movements. We don't stop at just igniting. We work for accelerating and sustaining. We have a strategic coordinator and grassroots coordinators doing follow-up after trainings. At the end of each training, an action plan is laid out. A copy is given to each person who received the training and a copy to the church, as well as a copy for our ministry. The plan includes the name and phone number of the church's contact person. Other leaders then follow up by phone, both individually with those who have taken the training and with the church's contact person. After 3 months, we make formal call to follow up and learn what's happening relative to the plan they made. We then continue communication with those going forward in doing the ministry. We make sure to cultivate those relationships and provide the needed training, mentoring, and coaching. We link them with other field workers in that area so they have a network to encourage them. Then we watch for workers who show significant potential to become a strategic coordinator for our area. As people begin to implement their reports from the field, must pass through their church. The church has to stand with it and verify what's happening. We don't want to go around the local church. We want the church involved in the ministry. That gives the church a sense of ownership and helps the relationship grow stronger. We always make sure to update church leaders in what progress is being made. Some unreached groups being reached are quite sensitive. In those cases, the church may not need or want to be directly involved in progress with that movement, but the church will be aware of and praying for the ministry and helping in appropriate ways. They also allow the new churches being planted to worship in ways that fit the new believers' cultural context and feel appropriate to the new believers. In this process, we don't try to change ministry patterns of existing churches, which would just make them feel threatened. The existing church can go on as it is. Our mission priority is to reach the unreached. The paradigm shift we aim for relates to the unreached, so we challenge, train, and equip the church leaders to reach the unreached. We communicate clearly that the church's normal patterns will not effectively engage unreached people groups. We want them to have a movement mentality and an attitudes towards unreached people groups. Sometimes a new mentality ends up coming back and transforming the whole church. Some of the church leaders also become practitioners and become movement leaders. So the paradigm sometimes impacts the local churches directly, but that's a byproduct, not our goal. Partnering with existing churches is a crucial element that has helped us accelerate and the disciple-making movement. We all came from those churches, and our goal is to impact other churches and start new churches. So we praise God. He is present and working in and through existing churches to bring movements of brand new churches planting churches among the unreached. Chapter 39, A Two-Rail Model for Existing Churches to Reach the Unreached by Trevor Larson and a Fruitful Band of Brothers. Our country is very diverse. Many areas have no believers in Christ, yet some regions have established churches. Some of these churches have potential to reach Muslims. However, most churches in majority, 90 to 99% Muslim areas, have not added Muslims as believers for years. They are often fear a reaction of some if some were to believe. In many majority Muslim areas, churches hold on to Christian cultural traditions. They don't connect with the unreached peoples in their communities. Cultural practices of the visible above-ground church and reactions to it make it difficult to connect with Muslims. The culture of above-ground first-rail churches differs greatly from the culture around them. This increases social obstacles for spiritual hungry Muslims. We propose a different model called a second-rail church. This underground church comes out of the same station but meets in small groups and is not easily noticed by the community. Can a traditional church in a majority Muslim area start a second-rail underground church? Can they disciple Muslims in small groups while also protecting the first-rail ministry of the church? Many pilot projects testing a two-rail model. In the nominal Muslim areas of the country, most denominational church growth has slowed or declined over the last 10 years. In these same 10 years, an underground model of multiplying small groups has grown rapidly among unreached people groups. Some churches ask us to train them in small group multiplication to reach Muslims, yet they want to keep their existing church first-rail church. We have piloted a two-rail model in 20 diverse types of churches in different regions. 4 of these pilot projects have finished 4-year pilot project period. This chapter represents the first of 4 experiences with the two-rail model. Additional insight and other 3 experiments can be found in the book Focus on the Fruit. See the endnote for more details. Case study, our first two-rail church. Zal completed a 4-year two-rail pilot project in a 90% Muslim area. This area has many nominal Muslims and also many fundamentalists. Zal explains that what they learned from this first two-rail model. 1. Careful selection of church and of trainees. A good model requires selection. We wanted to start with churches likely to succeed. So we chose carefully. I selected Church A for our project because the elderly pastor expressed great interest in bridging ministry to Muslims. Church A is part of a denomination from Europe, but also has included some features of local culture. They use local language for worship, but are otherwise very similar to churches in Europe. 51 years after it started, this church had 25 families attending regularly. I had known the pastor of Church A for many years. We had many small groups multiplying in the area around his church, started by workers from our local mission team. The pastor liked the fruit of our ministry and wanted to learn from us how to reach Muslims. A memo of understanding. As this pastor showed interest, we began discussing the terms of our partnership. We wrote that we needed a memo of understanding. I felt that a letter of agreement would decrease misunderstandings and make success more likely, so we signed an MOU between our mission team and the pastor describing the roles of the two parties in the partnership. First, the church agreed to provide 10 trainees willing to be sent out to minister to Muslims in the community. We discussed the criteria they should use to select the trainees so that they would be more likely to success in ministry to Muslims. The church promised a training location, budget for food, and full support of the pastor. The pastor also invited some other area pastors for training. Second, the church agreed that field direction would be done by our team. The pastor's role with the trainees was limited to broad oversight. He agreed not to interfere in our mission team's decisions about field ministry. He also agreed that the ministry patterns of existing church did not need to be followed by his trainees in their ministry to Muslims. They agreed to focus on the second rail model would be on unbelieving Muslims outside the current church. The underground rail of the church would be free to operate with contextual patterns. The church agreed that any fruit among Muslims that came from this partnership would be kept separate in small groups called a second rail church. The new believers would not be mixing with the above ground church. This was to protect the new believers from being westernized, as well as to protect them from a backlash against the church from fundamentalists. Third, we, the mission team, agreed to provide training for a period of 1 year. We promised to give training and mentoring to those active in ministry. I agreed to facilitate the training. We provided a budget for training materials. We also agreed to provide coaching for a period of 4 years for the most active trainees. Fourth, we, the mission team, agreed to provide a percentage of funds for the underground rail of the church to do community development ministries during the first year. We integrate our community development work with our model of multiplying small believer groups. The church agreed to provide any living or travel expenses of field workers, as well as a percentage of community development budget. Fifth, a report would be made every 3 months. This would include finance, ministry fruit, and character development of the trainees. My long-term friendship with the pastor both allowed this partnership to begin and strengthened it. The 2 tracks were designed to produce 2 separate churches that would look very different but have a common leadership. The church agreed that the trainees would provide data on their fruit to me as a facilitator, and they would not interfere. As a facilitator, I agreed to provide a summary of fruit data to the church leaders. They, in turn, agreed that they would not publicize the data to the church, nor report it to their community. 3. 1-year training and filtering participants. During the first year, we provided training consisting of 16 topics. This was done during the full day of training every other week. I agreed that half the training topics would grow Rail 1 church. This helped them see that we wanted to serve the above ground church, but my priority was the other half of the training topics designed to equip Rail 2 group. These focused on serving Muslims outside the church and discipling them quietly in small groups. The initial training year of training focused on character and 8 basic skills of leadership. One of these skills is egg management. This is what we call our report, using circles like eggs to show small group multiplication. We manage based on fruit, not on activity. In the field, we want to find workers who use a variety of strategies and tactics, but we mainly want to evaluate the fruit being produced by their activities. So we explain to field workers the markers of progress. After they agree to those markers, we do regular evaluation together. These 8 basic skill levels are important for field workers reaching Muslims. At each evaluation, we wanted to know which trainees had applied these 8 skills. The active trainees started to emerge as ones who applied these skills. If they weren't applied, why not? We supervised the trainees, motivated them, and evaluated them based on these 8 skills. Of 50 adults in the church, 26 were trained for both rails within the 16 training topics. After a group of months, only 10 felt God calling them to reach and disciple Muslims outside the church. These 10 people, about 20% of the adult church members, selected themselves for discipling Muslims. During our quarterly evaluations, we saw that 6 of these 10 churches choose to continue serving inside the church, Rail 1. They focused on doing church's ministry, training its members, and connecting with our other churches. Only 4 of the 10 were active in reaching the majority people. Some trainers might become discouraged at this point, but these 4 people represented 8% of the church, which is a high percentage for many churches. These 4 showed a special calling to disciple Muslims in the majority population. 4. Years 2 through 4, coaching and support for emerging field workers. We mentored only the 4 people who emerged as active in ministry. The mentoring of these 4 was done by believers in a 3rd-generation small group under our mission team. These were Muslims who had believed and who lived nearby. The 4 were sent out to serve Muslims in nearby regions. They each chose an area where they wanted to pioneer, within 25 to 30 kilometers of the church. This church of 25 families began to support these 4 families who dedicated themselves to Muslim ministry. Beyond their own efforts, church members did this by raising funds with donors outside the church. They contacted former church members who had moved away to cities and now had higher incomes. We focused on coaching these 4. The key in this ministry is not the initial training, because most people forget their training before they can apply it. The initial training serves as a filter to find the people called to active field ministry to Muslims. The key to coaching toward fruitfulness is regular dialogues between mentors and people active in ministry. Mentors discuss with trainees what they are facing in the field. They also review fruitful practices discussed in training and help active people get these training points working in their context. Many people need regular coaching to apply their training in the field. Inspired by the commitment of these 4 people, the church increased their commitment to its own 2-rail project. They agreed to provide these 4 with funds for the community development ministries. Community development is an important way to love Muslims who have low incomes. It gives evangelists social access to people to start small groups. We spent much time discussing security issues with the church and 4 active field people. This helped all become more discerning. 5. Much fruit in 4 years. Now, after 4 years, the ministry fruit initiated by these 4 church members has reached around 500 believers. This fruit in the underground Rail 2 church in small groups is much larger than the 50 adults in the above ground Rail 1 church in a building. They have developed small discipleship groups in which Muslims have come to faith. These in turn have started and are leading other small groups of Muslims who have come to faith. The pastor has kept this news of joyous fruit very quiet. obstacles faced, and vision reaffirmed. These 4 field workers have now become overseers of much fruit in 4 areas. I recently met with them and the new pastor of the above ground church. We discussed what to do if an emergency arises due to conflict with the growing number of fundamentalists involved in ISIS. We agreed that our believers in small groups will try to handle the problem without mentioning their connection to any other small group. But if the problem is very difficult and someone else has to be sacrificed, they need to sacrifice the above ground church by referencing their connection. This is a wonderful commitment in a country where many churches don't want to reach Muslims to avoid endangering their church. By sacrificing the above ground church, the risk will be limited to the church and will not involve the much larger number of believers in the Rail 2 church, underground church. The registered church might receive the protection of the law, whereas the underground church would not. So as much as possible, small groups will handle any conflicts as independent cells, so as not to endanger others. The 4 fields leaders will train the grassroots believers in small groups to handle things in this way. They will not be identified as Rail 1 church members. This will keep them out of harm's way. The younger church pastor who replaced the older one agreed to take this risk to protect the underground church. We are honest with churches we train in this 2 rail model. They need to see not only the benefits but also the risks of ministry to Muslims. The churches we train must agree to keep our reports secret. They cannot be shared with their church members or other Christians. Because of this, we carefully select churches we train and which members we mentor. We had security challenges in this 2 rail approach, but our greatest challenge has been the attacks of some church leaders. They criticize us, assuming we will not take care of the sheep if they do not go to a church building. However, we train a plurality of elders over each cluster to shepherd the sheep. We ask that each small group leader nurture an environment of mutual care between the small group members, so they care for one another. Some church leaders also criticize us for not reporting our fruit to the police, which would give it official status as a church. However, we are not concerned about official status. We focus instead on maturing the body of believers, so they become like the church we see in the New Testament. Those churches did not have an official status, but grew organically and biblically. This is our vision. The 2 rail model has 3 keys. 1. Use training as a filter to find a small number of well-selected people. 2. Negotiate healthy conditions beforehand with the church for developing those people, so the church does not interfere while they adopt new ministry paradigm. 3. Give ongoing coaching support to those who enter ministry to Muslims. The next part is how agencies can get involved. This gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a witness to all peoples, and then the end will come. Matthew 24:14.